Good afternoon and welcome to our third TEQSA Talks webinar and the last one for the year. My name is Josie Basari. I'm your host today, an Assistant Director Courses within TEQSA's Initial Registration Courses and Inquiries Group. In the spirit of reconciliation, TEQSA acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and their connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Today I'm joined by Dr. Mary Russell, our CEO, and Dr. Helen Ganil, Director of TEQSA's Higher Education Integrity Unit. Dr. Russell will be discussing students and staff wellbeing on campus, international student allocation, and our upcoming fees and charges consultation. Dr. Ganil will talk about our new cybersecurity modules and an update on the analysis TEQSA is doing of the AI action plans from providers. I'll also be moderating a Q&A session with our panelists after the formal presentation concludes. I'll speak more on that shortly. But first, a few housekeeping items for our webinar. We've designed TEQSA Talks to be interactive with Q&A session at the end. We want you to post your questions at any time in the Q&A, starting now. For questions we may have to take on notice or where we simply run out of time, we'll ensure we provide a response. If for some reason you can't post your question in the Q&A, please email it to comms@teqsa.gov.au. That's COMMS@teqsa.gov.au, and we'll pick it up. Also, a recording of today's session will be posted to our website. We'll let you know when it's published next week. And finally, you'll receive an email later this afternoon with all the relevant information mentioned today, including links and documents. There will also be a 5-minute survey to complete, and your feedback helps us improve the events we offer to the sector. Without further delay, let's begin. Our first speaker today is TEQSA CEO, Dr. Mary Russell.
Thank you, Josie, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So today there are a few matters that I want to discuss with you. The first of these relates to TEQSA's continuing focus on social cohesion and responses to conflict within higher education. As we all know, the Middle East conflict and ensuing protests in Australia have had a tremendous impact on students and staff across Australia's higher education sector. I'm well aware that many of these issues have been centred in our universities, and this is where the bulk of our regulatory response has been directed. However, I believe that it's important that all providers give attention to the impact that this conflict has been having and how recent events are also affecting staff and students in Australia. So regardless of whether you're a large university or a small provider, chances are you will have students and staff who are at risk of being subject to hate speech or experiencing distress due to the impact that the conflict is having on them or their family and friends. We've heard really clear evidence provided to the Parliament by students and by the Special Envoy to Combat Anti-Semitism about incidents of hate speech and vilification causing harm to students and staff within higher education in this country. This is clearly unacceptable. Unfortunately, the risk of this behaviour occurring is increasing as the conflict continues. The ongoing risk of provocation, discrimination and vilification requires monitoring and active management by all higher education providers. If you're unsure where to start, I suggest that you refer to the interim sector guidance that TEQSA has published in August in the form of an update to help to inform your institution's approach. As many of you would be aware, earlier this week the Senate Legal and Constitutional Affairs Legislation Committee passed their report into whether to establish a commission of inquiry into anti-Semitism at Australian universities. The committee recommended against establishing a committee of inquiry, but made a range of recommendations to address the issue of anti-Semitism within higher education. One of those recommendations was that in collaboration with the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency and the Special Envoy to Combat Anti-Semitism, all Australian universities urgently review their complaints processes and give effect to any and all changes that are necessary to ensure those processes are known to and understood by students and staff and deliver real and meaningful outcomes for complainants. This has repeatedly come up as a really important area for ongoing attention and work. TEQSA has already begun work on organising roundtable discussions with students and universities to address this and other issues with a view to quickly developing updated best practice guidance and regulatory expectations for the sector. It will be critical for governing bodies and university management to ensure they have in place appropriate processes for identifying, responding to and mitigating these risks. These roundtables will be independently facilitated and invitations will be going out shortly. We will, of course, share the outcomes of this work as it progresses with the sector as a whole. So another key issue that I want to raise with you relates to the Australian Government's proposed amendments to the ESOS Act. We have certainly seen that the rapid growth in international education since the end of the pandemic has given rise to some quality and integrity issues, which risk undermining the sector's reputation and social licence. Part of these reforms are the proposed changes to the ESOS Act to establish the national planning level. As you all know, under the managed system and subject to the passage of legislation, the Australian Government plans to set a national planning level of new overseas student commencements of 270,000 for the calendar year of 2025. While TEQSA is not responsible for the development of this legislation or setting the national planning level, we do take seriously our obligations as the ESOS Agency for Higher Education. TEQSA remains concerned that some providers may not be appropriately or fully managing the risks associated with recruiting international students. And as I noted in our last TEQSA Talks, poor practices increase the risk that overseas students are not set up for success or, at worst, are exploited, as well as undermining Australia's reputation for higher education. There's significant potential here for these issues to undermine the quality and trust within of the sector, including in markets that are important for higher education. So TEQSA is continuing to work closely with the Department of Education, with ASQA and with the Department of Home Affairs to identify and respond to emerging integrity risks. TEQSA has recently written to 10 registered higher education providers to seek assurance that each is meeting and is likely to continue to meet their obligations under the higher education standard threshold, the threshold standards, in relation to governance and oversight. This assurance includes outlining their current financial status and how they will ensure that they have appropriate risk plans and controls in place to manage any risks. These providers have previously been identified and contacted by the Department of Home Affairs regarding concerns about their recruitment practices for overseas students. So TEQSA acknowledges that our letter incorrectly suggested that the proposed national planning level had already taken effect. This is not the case, as the legislative amendments are still before the Parliament. We apologise for this error and are in the process of directly engaging with providers that received the letter in order to clarify our expectations. And finally, I want to update you all on some work that we've been doing internally at TEQSA to address provider feedback about how we respond to your inquiries. So based on what you've told us through our service charter review and annual provider survey, it's clear that our existing approach has not been hitting the mark in all cases. That's why we've established a new inquiries management team within the agency to improve the timeliness and the appropriateness of our responses to inquiries. A key focus for this team, for which we're in the early stages of recruiting, will be to implement new systems and processes to support us to respond to you. So while it'll take some time for this investment to start delivering, I wanted to bring it to your attention as a key change that's come as a result of your feedback to us. We welcome and appreciate you sharing with us these issues and opportunities for us to improve. I also note that the work on our service charter update is continuing internally, and I expect that we'll be in a position to update the service charter and have that in place by the 1st of January next year. So now I'll hand back to Josie.
Thank you, Mary. And a reminder to our audience, if you do have any questions, please post them in the Q&A. Mary, I'll stay with you for the moment to discuss cost recovery. On Monday, October 14th, TEQSA commences our fees and charges consultation with the sector about proposed changes to the cost recovery implementation statement. Can you talk about these proposals and what the impacts will be for providers?
Okay, so as we've done every year since we transitioned to increased cost recovery, TEQSA has reviewed the operation of the fees and charges outlined in our cost recovery implementation statement, handily called the CRIS, to ensure that it's fairly and accurately reflects the cost of our regulatory activities. So we are presently finalising a consultation paper that details the proposed change to the registered higher education provider charge for 2025. Following our internal review, we're not proposing any changes to the application-based fees or charges for compliance activities. We've been able to do this by further optimising our efficiencies to offset rising costs. We expect to release this consultation paper that details the proposed adjustments to the RHEP charge on the 14th of October. Given the need to finalise any changes to the RHEP charge, our fees and charges by late November 2024, in order to give certainty to providers, the consultation period will be limited to 2 weeks. All providers will be emailed once the consultation is opened to make sure that you're aware that that information is accessible and that you have the opportunity to respond. We'll also be sharing information on our website and social media channels in the next edition of the TEQSA in News. So we acknowledge that there may be inconvenience caused by this shortened consultation period. We hope that by foreshadowing this with you, that you can allow time to consider the proposed adjustments once the consultation paper is released. And if you have any questions, please email us at costrecovery@teqsa.gov.au. Thanks, Josie.
Thanks, Mary. And again, if the audience has any questions for TEQSA, please post them in the Q&A. A reminder, you can find the fees and charges consultation paper on our website when it is released on October the 14th. We welcome all feedback from our stakeholders. We'll include the URL to our consultation page in our post-webinar email to all attendees later this afternoon. Let's move to our next speaker now, Dr. Helen Gneil from TEQSA's Higher Education Integrity Unit.
Thanks, Josie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to give you an update on the work of the HEIU in the time since the previous TEQSA Talks. First of all, we're happy to say that we have now launched the cybersecurity modules that were developed in collaboration with RMIT and the Department of Education. These modules are available on TEQSA's learning management system, and they're available to anyone with an email address linked to a TEQSA registered provider. They are specifically aimed at supporting institutes of higher education to uplift their cybersecurity maturity. There are 2 modules that are available. One is appropriate for all staff and provides a foundation of knowledge to staff to reduce their vulnerability to cybercrime. And the second module is specifically aimed at supporting senior management in institutes of higher education. It provides an introduction to cybersecurity in Australian higher education, including supply chain and cyber risks and reporting incidents. Like the TEQSA Masterclass, these modules can be engaged with as online modules, as an online course, but we've also made these modules available for download as a SCORM package, which allows providers to embed these modules into their own LMS, and that helps you if you want to make them part of a staff induction process or as part of your professional development offerings to your staff. So I'd just really like to encourage all attendees joining us today from institutes of higher education to ensure their organisation is aware of these resources. And staying on the theme of institutes of higher education, I'd also like to thank those providers that responded to our work integrated learning survey that was in market during August and September. And we'll be sharing more about that project in 2025. We also recently published a new resource to support research integrity. Next slide. You can see it here. It's developed as a printable poster. We know that while any researcher can fall victim to predatory conferences or to predatory publishing practices, HDR students and early career researchers are particularly vulnerable to approaches from organisers of predatory conferences. So we encourage you to share this resource with all members of your research community and to place copies in high traffic areas utilised by research and HDR students at your provider. Moving on to the next slide, I'll give you a bit of an update on where we're up to with our analysis of the submissions. So in July 2024, when the submissions were due, I'm delighted to say we had a 100% response rate from providers. It's really fantastic, the level of partnership and engagement that we've seen with this initiative. We spent the last few months analysing these submissions. We're now in the process of finalising that and pulling out the high-level national trends and themes. As part of the TEQSA conference, there are pre-conference workshops being held the day before, and one of these is on the theme of the AI RFI. We will be showcasing some emerging practices that we've seen and also providing a snapshot of high-level trends that we've seen. And finally, following on from that event, we will be holding a special webinar, so please save the date of the 28th of November 2024. And we will be launching then the Strategies for Australian Higher Education Emerging Practice resource. So we're looking forward to sharing that with the sector. Thanks very much, Josie. Back to you.
Thank you, Helen. And a reminder to our audience again, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A. This concludes the formal updates from the panel today. So I'll now begin our Q&A session with questions from the audience. First question is, what is the update on the work the HEIU is doing to address the risk of contract cheating? I'll throw this to you, Helen.
Thanks, Josie. So we are continuing our work to support the sector mitigate the risk posed by contract cheating providers. We recently blocked a further 119 websites, bringing to total nearly 400 websites now that we've now disrupted access to. We've also continued to disable the social media posts and profiles associated with those websites and have nearly 1,000 social media posts and profiles deleted now. In addition, TEQSA is continuing our collaboration with our international counterparts through the Global Academic Integrity Network. The Global Academic Integrity Network, which was launched in 2022, has now grown to include 40 members drawn from 30 countries around the world. And recently we published our first collective statement using our collective global voice to call on social media platforms to work with us in each of our jurisdictions and reduce the availability and visibility of ads for these services. In addition, I'd like to remind everyone about the TEQSA Masterclass, Deterring and Detecting Contract Cheating. We've seen really good engagement with this resource, with over 3,500 staff members from Australian institutions engaging with the modules. It is an enduring resource and it does rely on you making new staff aware of this, particularly staff who are new to your institution or new to responsibilities associated with academic integrity. So please keep directing people to that masterclass. Thanks, Josie.
Thanks, Helen. That's impressive work. I'll move to our second question. From your perspective as TEQSA CEO, can Mary talk about the key regulatory risks and issues she's concerned about for 2025?
Absolutely. So look, there are a number. I think we would all recognise that in the current environment, international education will continue to be a focus area for TEQSA, particularly in terms of some of the integrity risks that exist in the sector or that are posed to the sector. We will also have a focus on governance and the importance of having really robust governance and self-assurance. Those of you who've been following our work on risk and our proposals to become even more kind of risk mature in the way that we do our regulatory work will understand that that is fundamentally underpinned by the need to have confidence in the active and effective governance and oversight, both by the management of a higher education provider, its governing body and its academic board. So we'll have an increased focus on monitoring these things, and we'll continue to work with the sector to sort of set and manage our expectations about what good looks like in identifying, managing and monitoring the relevant risks. We certainly expect that as the Fair Work Ombudsman's focus on wage underpayment is drawing to a close, that TEQSA will have a role in monitoring the ongoing implementation of safeguards and risk management to ensure those matters are satisfactorily managed in all higher education providers, but particularly in universities. Student wellbeing and safety will continue to be a key risk, as I've mentioned in the discussion today, as will academic integrity and artificial intelligence and the threats that those pose to the integrity of Australian degrees. And the other the issue that we know is live in the sector at the moment but falls within our remit will be to ensure that we're monitoring the financial standing of providers because of how fundamentally important that is to the ability to work sustainably and to continue to meet the higher education standards. So that does sound like a lot. That doesn't mean that it's all going to apply equally to all providers, but it does give you a sense of where our attention is going to be.
Thank you, Mary. Got another question that I'll throw your way. Is TEQSA doing anything to speed up the assessment of course accreditation applications from approved providers? What is the current time frame for applications like these? Okay, so we are really aware of the pressure of timeframes and the number of applications we have, both for re-registration and for course accreditation. I do want to share with you the why of that. So as many of you will know, during the pandemic we had relief measures for providers and we supported the providers by offering extensions to registration and in some cases to course accreditation. What that means now is that we're actually approaching the peak of the deferred work, and so we are much more busy than usual in that space. So we're doing a number of things at the moment to try and make sure that we can progress that work as quickly as possible and do so in a way that is proportionate to the risk of individual providers. So it may well be that for some of you who have course accreditation or re-regs in the pipeline, that we come back to you and ask you for additional information or do other things that help us to triage that work to help move it through as quickly as possible. We will be doing a round of communication to providers to ensure that as much as possible you're aware of where these matters are up to, and we're continuing to make a number of process changes to try and make sure that we can respond to these matters as quickly as possible. Josie, I don't know if you'd like to speak to the current timeframes on course accreditations. The current timeframes, as we've already established, it is blowing out, but we are doing some work in terms of renewal to have them moving as fast as possible. I don't have an exact time frame to provide at the moment, but we are working on different plans to implement processes that can actually allow us to renew these course accreditation, understanding that the length of time it's taking and the impact it has on the sector. Thank you. Our next question, can you update us on the recruitment process for the new Chief Commissioner? I'll throw this to you, Mary.
Thank you. I'll answer that as far as I can. So the appointment of the Chief Commissioner and Commissioners is a matter for the Minister. These are ministerial appointments. And because of that, the selection process is managed by the Department of Education independently and at arm's length from TEQSA. So we know that that process has been progressing, and we, like you, look forward to those announcements in due course.
Thank you, Mary.
Waiting for more questions.
Yes. And Mary, I'll throw this question to you. Can you outline the work that is taking place around tertiary harmonization with ASQA?
Yes, thanks, Josie. So we understand that there are ongoing pain points, particularly for dual sector providers, about I guess the burden of collective demands, but also points of disjunction with the requirements of ASQA and TEQSA. This was one of the issues that came out of the Higher Education Accord process, and it's an area that's been given some priority for ASQA and TEQSA to work together to develop an actionable strategy for increasing harmonisation across our schemes. That work is actively in train, and there will be opportunities for provider participation to help to inform that, and it will also leverage off the work that has happened over the last 18 months, where we've had an opportunity to understand better from providers what some of the low hanging fruit are, and also what some of the really kind of gnarly issues are. I do acknowledge that we do this in the context of regulatory acts and requirements that are very different, and that adds to the complexity of the work that we do to achieve harmonisation, but it doesn't mean that we don't need to progress that and achieve as much as we possibly can.
Thank you. Next question. Is there any process change in accepting new applications for accreditation for 2025?
Is that a question for you? Or a question for me?
I'll get you to start.
Okay. So we are changing our processes, and so we'll be reaching out to people who are due for re-accreditation, as we do for people who are due for re-registration, to share those with you. We are, over time, transitioning to assessment processes that are more risk-tiered and where we change the type of information that we're seeking upfront. So some of you will already have experienced the request. Well, I guess I think it's an opportunity to actually share with us as part of your application self-assurance information that makes it really clear to us the areas that you've identified from your own monitoring and assurance activities that need work or are opportunities to strengthen your courses, and what you're doing about those. So that type of self-assurance information will increasingly guide the way that we do our preliminary assessment or our initial assessment of your application, and it will help to inform what additional information we then seek from you as you move through that accreditation process. What it means is that processes will increasingly look different for different providers, and I cannot commend to you enough the importance of taking a look at how strong your own self-assurance processes are around academic review and evaluation and course review and improvement, because that will fundamentally make a difference to what we understand about your circumstances and how your application progresses through the accreditation process.
Thank you, Mary. The next question, we've noticed that TEQSA now asks providers to undertake self-assessment and submit documents as part of the course accreditation application. Would this assist an application getting assessed faster or not? I'm happy to speak to this. So in terms of self-assurance and self-assessment, it can potentially fasten the application. What we're looking for is confidence in providers understanding the environment that they operate in and being able to identify these risks and put in place measures that ensures that the awareness of these, it's also providing confidence to TEQSA that you are aware of the risks that are impacting your operations out there. Being upfront about it, being aware of it, gives us that level of confidence of being able to move through an assessment a lot faster. Would you like to add anything, Mary?
No, that's fantastic.
Thank you.
Josie.
Next question is, what current policies does TEQSA have to counter the Gen AI used by higher education students? Helen, I'll throw this question to you.
Thanks, Josie. TEQSA's position has been from the beginning that it's not feasible or desirable to have an outright ban on the use of generative AI by students. Ultimately, these are tools, and students are very rapidly going to move into a workforce where it's just expected that they can be ethical and effective users of these tools. So what we are doing is working with providers through the request for information to understand how they are going to transform their assessment processes to make sure that they are still confident that the students that they hand out awards to have developed the skills, knowledge and experience to be safe practitioners and to be worthy of receiving that award. In terms of direct interactions with students, we do have a AI Advice for Students webpage, which is also translated into 7 languages other than English, where we encourage students to be sure that they understand what the expectations are at their provider. We explain to students that it's quite reasonable that these expectations might differ by provider, by subject, or even by assessment type, depending on what it is that you're trying to assess. One of the things we did recently was conduct some focus groups with students, and something that came through really strongly was that students didn't have a solid understanding of why expectations would differ. They found this confusing. So I think it's really important for providers to think through not just whether you're explaining to students what the expectations are, but you're making it really clear to them why those expectations are set the way they are for that assessment task. So that's a practical piece of advice that we can pass on, but I think it's really important to note that an outright ban on generative AI is not going to be feasible.
Thanks, Helen. Just a moment, I'm fielding through questions. TEQSA conduct audit together reports from providers in relation to how instances of student data breach, alumnium data breach and other incidents, including staff misconduct in relation to student data and privacy, have been occurring. Does TEQSA make providers accountable for violating student personal data? These issues can be kept silent at universities unless investigated by TEQSA. Can I throw that to you, Mary?
Yeah, look, that's a difficult one, and I guess in answering this I acknowledge the profound challenge for not only every higher education provider but every institution that holds data and that interfaces with the internet about dealing with some of these threats which are increasingly sophisticated and increasingly common. So we're aware of a number of data breaches and have sought and received information from higher education providers, not only about how these have occurred, but in particular about how they have responded to, as far as possible, make sure that the people whose data has been affected have been informed, and to mitigate the risks of future data breaches. This will continue to be a challenge. I can only answer that question in general terms, but I would also note that if you have concerns about specific instances that you feel demonstrate that a provider has not been compliant with the higher education standards framework, that you should feel free to raise a concern with TEQSA. Helen, is there anything you want to add about cybersecurity?
I think just as you said, the risk to all providers is ever present, and increasingly we are seeing all types of higher education providers coming under sustained attack by cyber criminals. That's one of the big reasons why we've worked with the Cybersecurity Centre at RMIT and the Department of Education to release those modules that we launched last month.
Thank you, Helen. That brings us to end of today's TEQSA Talks webinar. Any questions we didn't get to, we'll make sure we'll respond to in the coming days. The first TEQSA Talks webinar for 2025 is being held on Thursday, 20 March, and we'll include a link to register in our email to you this afternoon. Please go to our website for all the information to register. We'll also include the link to the webinar on 28 November that Helen referred to, and links to any other documents mentioned today. Also, don't forget to register for TEQSA's 2024 conference, which is being held on the 12th and 13th November in Melbourne and virtually. You can find out more at texasconference.org.au. Your feedback about TEQSA Talks is really vital. We want you to tell us what you want to hear about so we can ensure you get the greatest value out of these webinars. Please complete our 5-minute survey. Thank you for your time today, and we hope to see you next time.